Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dan Nessel Show. I'm your host, Dan Nessel. It's been a while since we talked about leadership here on the show. And it's not for lack of leaders. Most of my guests have some claim to leadership expertise. I've spoken with business leaders, entrepreneurs, team leaders, leadership coaches across industries, roles, and even geographies. But recently I've been thinking a lot about my own profession, about communications and PR, and what it means to be a leader for us. Agencies aside, we're not always the first people who come to mind when we think about organizational leaders. And I wonder why that is. I think my guest tonight can help us to understand, and to help us understand leadership better full on. He's a leader by any measure, and what I'd like to call a rare find. He's a communicator who worked his way up to a leadership role in comms and then shifted to lead a multi-billion-dollar business for a global company. A graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and a former naval officer, after a decade in the military, he embarked on a public relations and communications career that would ultimately lead to roles such as Chief Communications Officer at Exelis and President of General Motors Defense. Now, as founder of 1988 Strategies, he runs his own coaching practice to impart his hard-earned leadership wisdom upon others. He's a public speaker, leadership trainer, counselor, and coach to the dozens of leaders that he's worked with. He's one of the leading voices in the field of strategic communications. It is my honor, my pleasure to welcome to the show my friend, David Albritton. David, it is very good to see you.
Good to see you, my friend. Hey, I need to meet that guy you just introduced, man.
Humble as always. One of the things that struck me about David the first time I met him, and I only met him in October for the first time, which is crazy because, I've been in this industry for such a long time. And I've heard your name from our mutual friend, Dave Whiting. Yeah. And Dave, shout out to you, my man. We've both been named to the PR Week Dashboard 25 this week.
I saw that today. Yeah, it was great. Congratulations to both of you.
To date this podcast a little bit. Yeah, thank you. It's crazy, unheard of honor. It's nuts. In fact, the two times now I'm meeting you have been right after I've won the only two awards in my entire life.
There we go.
So that's
so we've
something.
got to keep meeting. Is that what you're saying?
So,
every time we meet, you're going to get an award.
I'm going to schedule you for about 6 months from now.
I love it.
So I know that'll bring me the luck I need. But
I love it.
But yeah, when we met in October, it was at the Page Up conference, the Page Society, and many of my listeners, our listeners here, won't really be aware of the Page Society. I've spoken about some of the organizations I belong to, but Page is a global organization of ostensibly chief communications officers. And then there's a sub-organization called Page Up, which is basically the people that report to those people. And I'm in the Page Up organization. And it is a fantastic group of communicators and agency people and just people across the PR and communications industry. And in our October conference, we were really fortunate to have David there as our keynote speaker to talk about what he's been up to, and we'll get into that in the show, but really to talk about leadership and communications. And it struck so many notes, I think, with the people that were there. And I just wanted to really learn more, find out more. And of course, we struck up a good conversation and a friendship there. And, here he is on the show as a result. So David, I'm just so glad to see you here.
No, thanks, Dan.
Yeah. So how's everything going since I saw you last? Let's go through it a little bit.
Life's a roller coaster, man. We had a great holiday with the family, which is always great. I've got 3 kids, 3 grandkids, and to have all of them together in one location seems to be a rarity these days. But it was great that my wife and I had them, and which was phenomenal. But no, the business is going well, and really diving into this new career field that I'm really loving as a coach for folks. I've been a mentor my whole career. Love helping people, countless people, hundreds of people. And, a lot of times when you hear the word mentor, people think about it from a capital M perspective. I am your mentor. But I've gotten a whole lot more value out of the lowercase m mentor, and not even calling someone a mentor, somebody who just has institutional knowledge or wisdom or insights that can help me get better than I was yesterday. There's been so many people who have mentored me and didn't even know it. And I think, once I've kind of figured out earlier in my career that I could gain some value from those folks, that's what allowed me to kind of grow and go the way my career did. There is no way David Albritton was smart enough to do some of the stuff that ended up happening with me in my career. But I definitely leaned on, the shoulders of, countless people that I met who I trusted, who would impart wisdom and knowledge, my way, that just was helpful overall. And that's inside communications, that's outside communications, that's life, that's everything. And so it's kind of how I would frame, how I think about the world these days, in that you can't, I'm truly one that believes you can't get through this life journey alone. You have to, extend yourself to a point and allow others to just kind of help you get ahead. And I'm one that believes that it's my job also to impart that into the world as well, without question. Because if I put forth that positive energy out into the universe, even, if I know that I'm not going to get anything back from that person, I believe it's going to come back to me some way, somehow. And I think my career trajectory is definitely an example of how that's happened, quite honestly.
And we'll get into that in a second, because but even what you're saying in the first 30 seconds that you're speaking is like, there's already things to unpack. And I'm really looking forward to where we're going to go with this whole thing. But, when you talk about, putting the positivity out there in the universe and it's going to come back at you, it took me I've had my ups and downs in my life, right? As we all have. You mentioned a roller coaster. And I think it took me a whole lot longer than I probably should have to understand that the whole idea of, of just putting things out there and then good stuff will happen. It's not, there's not a science to it. And I'm sure that a lot of people will think, oh, there it is, the frou-frou communications guy or the woo-woo coming through, whatever you want to call it. But I think it's true. I think it's true in your evidence of it.
I think it's your belief system, right? You can believe anything you want. And if you are positive in your convictions, and if you trust and you have confidence, that belief in yourself will carry you forward as well. But, believing in other folks and their ability to help you and your ability to help them is what makes us human. Right. I think we're all put on this planet for a purpose, and our ability to help other people and accept help as well is what makes us different from other, species on this planet. I think that's the cornerstone of how I look at life, how I look at the profession, how I look at everything is how can people help me, but how can I help them as well?
It's a great framework, I think, to approach where we are in this world now. We're always talking about the evil shit that's going on everywhere around us. And whether it's in industry or politics or wherever you have it, like social media is nuts. Communicators are always dealing with this, right? It's one of the things that is part of our job. And I think there's there's a lack of understanding out there that, hey, we're really on the front lines of a lot of that as communicators. But like that mindset you're talking about, that belief system, if we don't have that as a profession and as a community, then we're lost, right? I think. Yeah.
It's funny, as you think about that, right? And you think about watching the news, listening to the news, and how we all consume news 24/7 now with that little device that we carry around our hand all day. It would tell you that the world is gloom and doom. We're going to go to nuclear war tomorrow. I mean, everything is negative that comes from that platform, right? Every computer, every phone, every tablet, everything. I try to remind people that outside of all the badness that is kind of thrust upon us when we kind of look at the world through those lenses, I go back to some of the most simplified, engagements that I've had over the last few years. And that's when, my family is an RV family and we like to go camping. And so we've been, since 2013, there's only 8 states in the lower 48 that we've not been in an RV. And so we've camped all over the country. And I'm telling you, I've had some of the best conversations with people who don't look like me, who don't come from my background, who have a different political affiliation, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
right? But we can stand there, have a dog, have a burger, have a beer, and just talk about life. Our kids are running around riding bikes and all of this kind of stuff. It just reminds you that there is a whole lot of goodness in this country and around the world
Yeah.
that we don't get to see through the media all the time, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so it helps you stay grounded in the fact of your humanity. And I can be, somewhat of a rational human being with this person, regardless if they think exactly like me.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't need them to think like me or, understand things through my perspective. But I can be collegial with them. I can have a conversation with them. And I think that's a microcosm of how we are in a workplace, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all bring backgrounds. We all bring biases. We all bring everything that's gone into our makeup from the time that we were born, where we grew up, what schools we went to, who we interfaced with, played sports with, whatever that is. And then we come into the workplace. Right. And now we're this Campbell's soup of just people trying to come together to form a team to go do some stuff. Well, if you stay positive and in the mindset that I can work with these people, regardless of my background, but regardless of what I believe about certain types of things, and just keep it at that level, that's when you can really gel and really make some stuff happen on the positive side. That's true team building to me.
Yeah.
It's kind of, and that's the whole nation, the whole notion around DEI as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being empathetic with somebody else's position, somebody else's thought process, et cetera, et cetera. I don't have to 100% agree, but I'm open to listening. All I need you to do is listen and understand my point of view and perspective, and we can get along. I mean, that to me is the core essence of what the DEI conversation is all about.
Yeah. And I didn't mention that in the intro, but you do a lot of work in DEI, and mm-hmm. I think we can get to that as well as we talk. But I want to go back a second here. We jumped ahead, and although I love this whole conversation, the idea of mindset, I'm going to put sort of a hold on that and positivity. Because it had to have come from somewhere for you, and certainly those of us who've been in professional situations, actually those of us who are just human and living and alive for many years, we've been exposed to various types of other, to all kinds of other people, to different situations, to different organizations, and the way that you fortify your mind and the way that you kind of approach it, your mindset, that magic word that pops up so often is, I think it's so misunderstood, and I definitely want to hear your thoughts on that a little bit more, but more to the point of how did you get to the point where you have the mindset that you have? So in other words, what is the story of David Albritton that led to being the coach that you are?
Well, I grew up in Philadelphia. Go Eagles, right? We're going to the Super Bowl here. But
I'm kind of in Eagles territory.
The most transformational experience for me in my life was, I graduated high school on June 15th, 1983. And by July 5th, I'm in Newport, Rhode Island at the Naval Academy Preparatory School, right? So I'm 17 years old, and I'm thrust into a military environment. Now, I'd had people in my family that were in the military, but I had not been. Mm-hmm. I wasn't in ROTC in high school or anything. So, this was my first real experience. And the thing that all military people have, regardless of service, is a core common experience, which is basic training, right? Mm-hmm. The job of your superiors is to break you down to the lowest level, take away all your human rights, and then over time give them back to you as privileges. Okay. So when you're broken down to that level where you can't even go to the restroom without permission, you can't go to sleep without permission, you can't wake up and go walk around without permission, you got to put on certain clothes, you've got to address people in certain ways, all of that. And meanwhile, you're getting yelled at. You're getting, you're running around. You have to push up all the time. Somebody's screaming at you. You got 5 people in your face screaming at the top of your lungs, and you're going nuts, right? The thing that happens through all of that experience is that when you look left and look right, everybody's going through the same experience, and so the natural thing to do is to form a team so that you're going through this together, okay? And so if you think about leadership in the future, right? You can't be a good leader until you've learned how to be a good follower. And in the basic training experience, you've learned how to follow. You're listening to the commands of your senior officers, and you're looking, left and right to kind of figure things out. And they give you tasks that you're supposed to figure out together and all of that. And if you think about that from the social structure, we all come from different parts of the country, different social classes and different backgrounds and educational backgrounds and all of that. Yet we're now thrust together. And at the same time, we are going to get through this experience together. That to me was foundational, right? Mm-hmm. I met some of the best friends of my life through that experience to this day. It's ironic. This makes 40 years since I, came out of high school and started that experience. Ooh. So for 40 years, some of the best people, and even if I don't talk to them for years, they will still be some of the most important people in my world just because of what we went through together 40 years ago. All right. And so if you think about that as a construct for an attitude and how you think about the world, I've been broken down to the level where I didn't know where I was going the next minute. I didn't know if I could take another step on that long run that we just, that we're on right now. However, because I learned a lot about myself through that experience, that I can take one more step when, the situation is bad and it's gloomy and, I just don't feel like I can do anything else. And you got somebody else to prop you up to kind of keep you going forward. And you can do the same for somebody else, right? Anything else is easy after that. Right. And so then I repeated that process. So I did a year of prep school and then I went to Annapolis, so plebe year at the Naval Academy, which as arduous and tough as that was, I'd already kind of been through that the year before. So it wasn't as tough as it probably would have been if I had just come out of high school to do it. But the same process again, right? We get each other as classmates through that process. And if you think about that at a boot camp for the U.S. Marine Corps, the Army, or the Navy, or, from the enlisted side, but, also on the officer side, the different programs that bring officers into the military, we all kind of go through the same stuff to enable us to come together and build these teams. Because when we get out to the fleet and we're on ships and we're flying aircraft, and we're on submarines, we have to form a team and we have to have, strong leadership to be able to operate, the U.S. military.
Yeah.
So I say all of that to say I took that core belief system, that core understanding, that core experience, and I kind of brought it forward when I decided to get out of the Navy in 1998. So I spent 15 total years in uniform, to include 4 years at the Naval Academy. But that belief system and that ability to look at a situation and say, nothing is ever going to be as bad as that day, plebe summer, right? I can always equate that. And that allows me to just take one more step forward on those days in my corporate roles when I'm sitting there pulling my hair out when I still had hair, to say, wow, this is tough. Well, if I can equate it to that, and it's not tougher than that, then of course I can keep moving forward. I just got to figure it out. So that's kind of where it all came from. That's
how that mindset sort of evolved and developed.
Absolutely.
Initially. Yeah, and it's not an uncommon story to hear of people who've gone through, some kind of hardship together or some kind of, difficulty together. Although in your case and in many people in the military, it's by choice. You elect, and thank you, by the way, for doing that, and thank you for your service. You choose to go that route. You choose to defend your country. You choose to, wear a uniform, and you sort of have some idea of what might be coming, but nobody knows until you actually kind of get into the thick of it, as they say. And I wouldn't know because I haven't been in the military, but I know a guy who has. I know plenty of guys, but I've worked with so many ex-military folks who are just stellar at public relations. I mean, it has to do with just what you just said, which is the worst day is behind you. So that no matter what happens, it's not going to be as bad. You can get through it. You can take that extra step because you've done it before.
Absolutely.
One of the most memorable exercises I've ever done in my PR and marketing career was a crisis training, like crisis simulation. It wasn't thankfully it wasn't a real crisis, but we did this crisis simulation game exercise for like a half a day or full day. The facilitator was like ex-SAS, like this badass British guy. And he's a vice president of a PR firm, right? But this is his background. And when it comes to the crisis stuff, holy moly, was he good. And I've seen this happen again and again with people who have some sort of military or police or first responders. Like, these folks are just calm and cool in a crisis because you just obviously it's as my friend Daniela says, it's PR, not ER. You can figure it out. You're not going to get killed as you would have on a ship if you weren't a good team.
Right. Well, I try to explain to people about the military experience. People, they don't yell at you just for the sake of yelling at you, right?
Yeah.
Particularly if you think about folks going through a pipeline who are going to be jet pilots at some point, right? They need people who can take pressure, deal with pressure, and then deal with the situation in a calm, stoic manner so that they can keep themselves alive and keep other people alive and make the best decision as needed for the situation. Mm-hmm. So you're dealing with pressure while you're getting screamed at and all of that. And then you get used to it. And then the screaming becomes less of an issue, and you're being taught to to think and have thought processes that are rational when you've got all this stuff and turmoil going around you. That's, I think, why military people are so calm, cool, collected, right? Mm-hmm. So that was my experience, right? So I didn't come into public relations through the natural progression, right? My undergrad at the Naval Academy was in engineering, okay? I then went to a ship. I was stationed on a ship, an amphibious ship called USS Portland for 39 months after I graduated. We were gone a lot. We went to Desert Shield, Desert Storm for 8.5 months. So we were, over there back in that time frame. And then when I got off of that ship, I went to 2 years of graduate school. I went to Naval Postgraduate School out in Monterey, California. And as I was completing that tour, I was still in the Navy, but I was a full-time student for 2 years. And at the time, the Navy wanted to send me back to sea on a second ship. I'd been gone so much on that first ship, I really wasn't having that at that point. I had kids were young, stuff was just, I wasn't ready for that.
But it's the Navy, David, the Navy.
I got you, but when you're gone as much as we were, I wasn't looking forward to getting assigned to another ship and being gone that long again. Oh, totally. So I was looking for another career in the Navy, and had no idea what I kind of knew what public affairs was, but kind of didn't. But I'd had a couple of friends who had switched careers in the Navy to Navy public affairs. And one of my best friends from the academy was stationed in the Pentagon. So I went back home on leave to Philly before I graduated grad school. And he was stationed in the Pentagon Navy public affairs office. It's called the Chief of Information Office. At the time, it was run by a 2-star Navy admiral. And so I went to visit him. I met all the PAOs there, and I saw the operation. And so I liked it. And I put in a package with the Secretary of the Navy's office to switch my career from ships to public affairs. And thankfully, I got picked up. And so when I graduated grad school, they sent me to Indianapolis to go to the Defense Information School for 9 weeks, that school is now in Fort Meade, Maryland. But it's basically what we used to call knife and fork school to teach you the basics of public relations, okay? Then my first assignment was at the Chief of Information Office in the Pentagon. So I started off in plans and policy, writing, public affairs guidance for different operations and, activities and all those things. And then I went to the Navy News Desk. And the Navy News Desk back then, really we had the blue side and the gold side. The blue side was all personnel related. The gold side was all operational and hardware and that kind of stuff. Well, you talk about the pointy end of the spear, because the Pentagon press corps is walking through your office all day, every day. At night, you're seeing John McWethy and Jamie McIntyre and David Martin. They're all on the news, CBS, ABC, CNN. During the day, they're standing behind you, asking you what's the Navy's comment on this issue, that issue. I'm brand new to PR, at the time. And I'm telling you, you talk about a pressure cooker. It was definitely a fire hose approach. But I tell you, when you think about looking left and looking right, those PAOs who were on that desk with me were godsends in terms of taking me under their wing and teaching me. But then I also had a leader. His name is Stephen Petropoli. Petropoli was a commander then. He ended up becoming an admiral in his career later. He became the chief of information later in his career. But Petropoli ran the news desk. And we as young lieutenants would be in his office daily while he's talking to reporters. and he would just school us on how and why. I mean, so he'd talk to the reporter and we'd listen. And then afterwards, he would sit us down and talk to us about why he said it this way, what he said, how he positioned it, that type of thing. And we're just taking copious notes. That experience to me helped me to be confident in my media relations skills, honestly, watching him daily. And he's still a great friend to this day. He's since retired from the Navy and doing great things. But every time I see him, I thank him for teaching me the basics back then.
I've never known how the communicators inside the armed forces or even inside whatever parts of the government learn their craft. And it is a craft. Make no mistake about it. It's not like you can just suddenly have knowledge and then answer questions about it, because people are out to get you, or they're out for an angle, or they're looking for some sort of an answer. And you do need to be very prescriptive about the way that you talk, especially, I guess, in the field that you were in. You're talking about
right.
National security, but media training typically is you get an executive in a room, you get some agency people who were reporters at one point, or who are very, very good at pretending to be reporters, to essentially grill the hell out of them and critique them afterwards. Like you do like a simulation, give them some talking points, the usual kind of routine for media relations. That's like standard stuff.
We did that a lot in the military as well. I was
going to ask you, when you were at the desk there, I mean, did you have to get trained that way? And when in those early days, just it occurred to me, with these reporters hanging around, looking over your shoulder, did you ever get in a situation where you were, off script or off talking points, or you had to kind of scramble or, rescue the narrative or whatever?
Thankfully, there was enough people around that I didn't step in it too badly, just because I could look left and right and ask a dumb question versus just stepping in it. Unfortunately, one of the things I remember most was back in '94. I was the guy who took the media inquiry on the desk. We had an F-14 go down, and Lieutenant Kara Holt Green was the pilot. And back in that time, a big issue, that was around the time when women were allowed to fly tactical aircraft. And unfortunately, we lost her. Yeah. And I took that inquiry from the media. It reminds you of your humanity first. We lost a young naval officer who'd volunteered to serve this country and do it well in a very tough profession. Flying aircraft on and off an aircraft carrier it's not natural, right? So just the humanity of that hits you in that, but you still have to perform. Yeah. And then working that through the system, and everything, and then all the subsequent news coverage about whether women should be in aircraft and not, just that whole narrative started coming out and us having to address it. It was somewhat of a crisis communication situation, but it did teach us how to position and how to react and still try to protect her legacy, her identity, because she deserved that, protect her family, and protect the Navy. At the same time. Yeah. So your purpose is much bigger than you when you're going through that. But again, having folks who can kind of teach you and guide you and, give you some direct feedback. Sometimes, if you need a bump on the head to kind of get it, then, all right, it's good. But I'm just thankful for everybody that was around me during that time. The two-star Rear Admiral Kendall Pease, he's a legend in Navy Public Affairs. Ended up, when I left the desk, I went to become his aide for just over a year. And I tell you, it's probably one of the best jobs I ever had, because I had access to him. His two bosses were the Secretary of the Navy and the Chief of Naval Operations. And so, he was at the pointy end of the spear inside the Navy, inside the Pentagon, and I'm with him. I'm all day, every day. I learned so much. I gained confidence. It was just, and he was such a great leader in teaching. Right. Naval Academy grad. He played football with Roger Staubach at Naval Academy. But another leader that I emulated throughout my career, just because he was so giving with teaching and allowing you to fail sometimes without shooting you, which, is an attribute of a leader that's important, et cetera. Do we all, fall into that all the time? No. Have I failed miserably in certain instances? Absolutely. But, it is a goal to emulate when you're thinking about becoming a really good leader.
Well, so you have, you spent 15 years in uniform. You were, you rose through the profession, the early parts of the profession that way. I mean, people, cut their teeth in PR and in communications in different ways. And it sounds like, doing it for 10 years for the military, certainly for the Navy, you probably had a much higher percentage of crisis comms type of activity than, let's say, an average corporate person would have. I mean, agency people who specialize in that, they're a special kind of person. They do that all the time. But when you work for, essentially, if you're a corporate PR person for the Navy, but as an officer for that organization, there's a certain level of responsibility and a certain level of knowledge that you have to have clearly. And to get through, 10 years you're 15 years in uniforms, but the last several years of which
the last five, five and a half or so was as a public affairs officer.
Right. So then you left the Navy and you transitioned into civilian life.
I did.
But straight into comms, right? Into PR.
Yeah. Well, I literally got out of the Navy to go take a job at Sears Roebuck and Company. So when I left the Pentagon, I went to London, England. We had a 4-star Navy headquarters called the Commander-in-Chief U.S. Navy Forces Europe. And it was in the West End of London, kitty corner to the American Embassy in Grosvenor Square. Man, you talk about tough, arduous duty. I absolutely raised my hand to serve my country well in the West End of London.
Yeah, that's terrible.
So, it's just one of those things. I loved it. I was gone a lot. The area of operations for Sincus Navure was from the north tip of Norway to the south tip of South Africa, all the way across the Med, across Eastern Europe, in the north half of Africa. So all Navy Marine Corps operations in that theater of operations is when ships came from the East Coast and then chopped into our theater, we had operational control of them. And so you talk about real world operations, you talk about exercises, you talk about all kinds of different things. And so, I was somewhere all the time. I mean, I've been to 55 countries in my life, and a lot of that was because I was flying around doing things for, when I was there in London. A lot of crisis, but a lot of fun stuff too, right? Just introducing the Navy to people who don't get to see it in different countries, embarking, senior officials, taking them on a U.S. aircraft carrier overnight. Who gets to fly on a carrier and fly off of it and get to see the operations on a carrier at sea? It's just a phenomenal experience for somebody to kind of see that and see how the U.S. Navy operates. That is not an everyday experience, but we would take, civilian leaders from different countries and other officials, corporate leaders, et cetera, et cetera. I had a bunch of, countless, so many cool experiences doing that. But we had some real world situations too, right? So 96, 97, 98, we evacuated the embassies due to civil war in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Central African Republic. So we would take an amphibious aircraft carrier out of the Mediterranean and park it off the coast of Western Africa and then fly the helicopters into theater, right? Now, when you get into the embassy compound, you got Navy SEALs and, Marines on the perimeter as snipers just in case something's happening. But now you're coming in on a helicopter where somebody might take a pot shot at you, right? So you got to take your Kevlar helmet off and sit on it in case a bullet's coming up your butt, right? That never happened, but just the concept of having to go in a place like that.
Yeah, most PR pros don't.
War. Yeah, we're not at war. Yeah. We're not in, but to kind of think about that at that time for me was just different. But we take the press corps in to kind of get their stories and that kind of stuff. So that was a phenomenal, fascinating experience. I think one of the coolest ones I had during that is, you remember in 96, we went into Bosnia. Okay. And, the unfortunate part about Bosnia, that whole situation was tens of thousands of people were displaced and they had to move from point A to point B.
Yeah.
And you've got soldiers from multinational forces coming together to help these people who are displaced move from point A to point B. Well, a soldier is trained to carry a rifle and to fight wars and those types of things. They're not, trained to move a family with a baby that needs diapers and food and blankets and all that kind of stuff. And so we did an exercise called Baltic Challenge. The first year was in Riga, Latvia. The second year was Tallinn, Estonia. And the third year was in Vilnius, Lithuania. And it was basically a multinational 10 nation exercise where we brought about 15,000 troops together from all the forces to basically do peacekeeping training exercises to teach people how to deal with this. So we had many scenarios, and each of the forces would go through and all of this. So we had about, I want to say 7,500 reserve, Army Reserve and Marine Corps troops from the U.S. side, and the rest were from the Germans and the Norwegians and the Swedes and the Brits and everybody, plus the Baltic nations as well. Well, as innocent as the exercise was, because no troop had any, we had weapons but no ammunition. We weren't doing live firing. It's just a very innocuous type of exercise. However, I equate this to, if we were in LA and the Russians or some other force brought 7,500 of their troops to Tijuana, right? How would we feel? How would that play in Los Angeles in the press? Well, equate that to, I'm on the eastern border of Russia in Latvia with 15,000 foreign forces doing this thing. And so the media in Russia were covering this like the U.S. has come with nuke weapons and they're going to invade and all this. So I'm on the phone daily with the Pentagon, right? Just kind of and we ended up inviting the Russian press to come just go through the cycle with us so they could see that this was not an aggressive force. We were really just doing kind of rifle cleaning, if you will. But as the public affairs officer for the exercise, fascinating experience, right? Just talking to different media, international media. You had senior delegations from countries coming through, and you're an ambassador because you're wearing a U.S. uniform and all that. Fascinating experience. And for me, as an African American male, in a country where some of the kids and some people had never seen somebody look like me. I had kids coming up, touching my skin, like, wow, who is this guy? I mean, so just as a young man, to be able to go through something like that and experience it was just phenomenal. It was fascinating. Just, it really just helped my view of the world and allowed me to see that, differences can be accepted freely and everything else, all under the umbrella of, U.S. military service. So, I've got countless stories like that, which is I'm sure my kids have heard 500 times.
Well, first of all, it's fantastic. It's a fantastic story, but thinking of it like a comms person, certainly I've never had to put a Kevlar helmet under my ass to kind of protect myself as I fly into theater. That's never part of my PR career. So you've had some certain experiences that are very, very different. But just dealing with, the perceptions, right? So when you're teaching thousands and thousands of troops, right, military people who are warriors, right, to basically to take care of families. To take care of the dispossessed and the folks, the refugees that were leaving war zones and so on. And, you mentioned crying babies and so on, right? I mean, from the Russian standpoint, it's very easy to see, because, maybe now is not the best time to talk about Russia, but from the Russian standpoint or from any external standpoint, doesn't understand. All of a sudden there's 15,000 troops at the border. You're dealing with the perception of that. You're dealing with the perception that, oh gosh, there's an invasion force right there. Or you're dealing with the perception from our side, which is like, come on, man. It's like, we're just teaching people how to handle babies, and being in the middle of that is really, I think, a place where communicators find themselves a lot and just trying to figure out the way to kind of tell that story. So it's no surprise that when you got out, and you said you had a lot of those stories. I mean, it's no surprise that when you got out, you were pretty well sought after. I mean, looking at your profile and your resume, you went through Sears and then, a couple other companies. You ended up working, of course, for very, very large defense contractors and such. you know, what are some of the highlights of your professional career from that point that you think kind of, puts you in the place where you were thinking, you know what, the most interesting part of this is the leadership part of it, right? Because that's where you ended up going with it all. But first, you had to be a communicator at the same time. So yeah.
I think I equate it to something I maybe mentioned earlier. It's just the folks around me, right? I never believed by myself that I was smart enough to do anything, right? Of course, I thought, smart enough guy. I went to Naval Academy, was a naval officer, all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't like that. But my belief system wasn't one that, hey, I'm better than this person, that person, that person. So, you listen to me. I think my spirit has always been one that's, hey, what are your ideas? What do you think? What's your approach to this? And kind of bring in other people because, one of the things I think I learned early on in my civilian PR career is the fact that, PR is not an exact science, right? 1 + 1 doesn't always equal 2 for us. And there's not a formulaic way to get everything done. You can take 5 different approaches and all of them can be right in the instance. And so it's just a matter of what you sign up for, what we agree to as a team. And then what can we characterize through leadership to get them on board with what our approach is going to be as well. So I think that's the summation of all those experiences across all those companies, right? But I think one of the things that I learned, particularly as I started getting higher positions of authority, was that I couldn't just be a communications person, right? Yeah. I had to become more of a business partner. I had to develop, a business acumen that would allow me to show up in meetings and not just be the comms guy. Right. Because I do a lot of guest lecturing, in universities and that kind of stuff. And then, more junior professionals, et cetera. And one of the things I say, I've got a slide, and it's a stupid slide, but I truly believe in it. It's an image. It says PR does not equal press release. Okay. And it's a stupid connotation, however, but it's an accurate one, because if PR stands for press release in the minds of the people that you're working with outside of comms, then they're viewing you as a tactical element, and you will never be at the strategy table. All right. Your job is to help them think about strategic communications as an asset that's going to help this organization grow. You can impart your wisdom in that way if you're having conversations with them that allows them to believe that you're capable of having those things. And so that's kind of my mindset as I kept going and, learning more. And in those instances where I didn't know, not being afraid to ask people to help me, or recognizing perhaps that I have a hole in my swing. I mean, I think the story that supports that is, I was the VP of comms at ITT Defense, which was a $6.5 billion defense business of the $11 billion ITT. And then in 2011, when ITT broke into 3 public companies, ITT Defense spun off to become Exelis. Well, the leadership of ITT could have easily gone out and hired a CCO, but they promoted me into that role. I was thankful. So they thought enough about me and my, what I had done as the VP of Comm at ITT Defense to promote me to be a CCO, even though I didn't have that background. I'd never been the CCO of a public company with public-facing responsibilities for quarterly earnings cycles and everything we do on Wall Street, buy and sell side, and all that other stuff that goes along with public companies. Well, I realized that I had that hole in my swing, and so I needed to do something about it. And so I got Exelis to send me to Wharton. I went to Wharton for a week to a course called the Finance and Accounting for Non-Financial Managers. So essentially a semester-long course taught in a week. And the book was like 6 inches thick and everything else. However, it taught me so much about corporate finance, and it gave me enough to be at least conversational on some basic topics, so that when I got back to Exelis, I could leverage the resources around me to kind of, become more adept at how we, as newly, formed public company, needed to operate. Develop a really solid relationship with our CFO, Pete Milligan, who was awesome. Our VP of Investor Relations, Katie Hare, still a great friend. And then, the irony in all of this. So my number two, BJ Talley, who ended up being, after Exelis became the CCO at TE Connectivity, but he was a director and I'm the CCO, but BJ was a whiz at financial communications. That guy taught me more about financial communications than probably anybody else. And so I tell people all the time, just because you have title does not mean you know.
Right.
And if you can, adjust your ego to understand that everybody around you in a 360-degree sphere of influence can teach you something, then you can learn from everybody and they can be all contributors to the ultimate solution. Right?
Isn't that so what you've just encapsulated, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but what you've just encapsulated seems to be, a common theme among leaders who are well respected and successful across their organizations. Although there are still like some bumps in the road. And what I mean is, these leaders are the ones who say, "Look, I am not the smartest person in the room for all these different things, right? For some reason, I'm pretty good at putting it all together, but I can't put each piece together myself. So if I knew everything there was to know about finance, I would be the CFO, not the CEO. So I don't ever want to say, I think you should do X. I want you to tell me, what is happening in your particular area of specialty. And then I will kind of percolate on that, right? And I'm supposed to be able to, to kind of come up with a strategic solution based on what I'm hearing, or to make the hard decisions. That's, be informed when I go talk to the shareholders, or the stakeholders, or whoever the boss is, because believe me, the boss isn't the ultimate boss. There's always another boss, right? So who am I going to persuade with this? You have to help me do that. So it's no surprise, like what you're saying there about, your colleague or the person who reported to you who was the FinCom's whiz, right? I run a team now. I am not very good at, I'll be the first person to tell you, and my team will probably also be the first people to tell you that I'm not really great at all the little details of, let's say, an event, right? Like event management. I love events. I kind of know what should happen at events, but I leave that to the people who love and know and understand what events mean, right?
Absolutely.
So I have things to say here and there, but generally speaking, I'm a product of their good talent and skill. And do I slip every now and then and feel like I have to be a know-it-all? Sure. I admit it, but I think my podcast has helped me get that off my chest a bit. But,
I love it. It's therapy for you.
It is. It is definitely therapeutic, but it's also learning, right? And the other thing that you were talking about, about going to Wharton, that hole in the game, right?
Yeah.
Now, my very favorite thing about being in communications is the fact that we touch everything, right? The fact that we touch everything gives us license to try to learn about everything.
Absolutely.
And, that way, if somebody's saying, "Hey, what are you doing?" I'm, I don't know, like nobody's ever like looking over my shoulder, but just in case they were, and they're saying, "Hey, why are you spending time on that?" I'm like, I'm spending time on this because it will help me understand our director of sales better. It will help me understand what our CFO is talking about better, right? It'll help me understand what our IT people are doing, So like, you got to know these things, I think, at a high level. So anyway, you had that hole in the game, and it seems like you pretty well filled it, because your next kind of, well, maybe not the next role, but it sent you on that trajectory, which actually got you out of comms. And that's kind of, I don't want to skip over too much, but when you live the dream, I think a lot of comms people just are very cool, like being comms, like I want to be the top comms guy. I don't like, I'm not talking about me. That's like the generic comms person wants to be at the top of their profession. But they don't think about going over to becoming a business manager.
I hadn't thought about it either. Yeah. This was strictly a function of the leadership of General Motors believing something about me that perhaps I didn't see. So if you go back a little bit, so I was a CCO at Exelis. My entire career goal at the time was to be a CCO. the story we skipped over was I got out of the Navy to go work for Ron Culp, who was a CCO at Sears Roebuck and Company back then. And because I loved Ron still today is, great friend, mentor. I love him to death. But my whole career goal and aspiration was to be a CCO like Ron. And so 98, when I got out to go work for him, 2011, I become a CCO. Right. And so I had kind of checked the box, and I figured if I can do this for the rest of my career, if Exelis had not gotten acquired, I would have been happy in that job for the rest of my career. I'd loved the team. The CEO, Dave Meltzer, was phenomenal. Our team was great. I loved the mission. I loved the company. I wouldn't have had to go anywhere else. But then, just because corporations change and it's, a lot of, dynamic situations, we got acquired, and the whole headquarters, the whole company went away. And so, thankfully, the now number 2 executive GM, Mark Royce, was on our board at Exelis. And basically, you're not going to have a job once you come work for me at GM. And so I did. But, and here's when you talk about mentors, right? So I got a bunch of mentors, right? Maybe most of them are small M mentors, not capital M mentors, who have just been in my friends group forever. And more than half of them were saying, well, you were a CCO, you got to go be a CCO again. At GM, I wasn't going to be the CCO. They already had a phenomenal CCO, Tony Savone. So I became executive director for global product development communications, which, all 34,000 engineers in GM, et cetera, working directly for Mark, who was the EVP for global product development. Phenomenal job, right? So you think about pointing in the spear of how the automotive industry is designed and then created, and GM makes 10 million cars a year globally. I mean, it's phenomenal side, and for me, that was cool. I hadn't ever really been a car guy in the industry, but I was learning so much, and it was so fun. All right. And then maybe 2 years into it, I picked up all global communications outside the U.S. So I owned that plus GPD. But GM had reincarnated its General Motors defense business that had sold back in 2003 to General Dynamics. Just, because of the advancement of capabilities like EVs, AVs, connected ecosystems in vehicles, braking systems, all kinds of, advanced technologies in vehicles that perhaps could translate well into the military environment. Wanted to kind of see if that was a new, unique market that they could extend those capabilities. So they stood up GM Defense again. Well, because of my background in defense industry, I was on the board of GM Defense for about a year and a half or two. Then the company made some leadership changes for that business. And I get a call. I remember it's about just after 7 a.m. on a Thursday. It's Mark calling me because we normally talk early in the morning on his way in because he was so busy. He's trying, just to coordinate our schedules. We would talk on commute in. That was a great time for us to connect. So I'm thinking it's just a normal morning connect, thinking about his upcoming speaking engagements or whatever it was. I had no freaking idea. And well, hey, I got a new job for you. You're going to be the president of GM Defense. And the first question I asked him, I said, "Are you sure?" Because I had never contemplated that job whatsoever. Didn't, ask anybody for it. I didn't put it in my scope. I didn't say, "Hey, I would like that job in the future." I was happy at GM in my comms role. Everything was great. Loved the team. Loved the business. It was exciting. If you think about the advancement of electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles and getting to ride in autonomous vehicles and, drive Corvettes and Camaros, and I'm having a blast. And then, hey, we want you to go do this thing. Wow. Okay, let's go. And so I did it. And, then you quickly realize that as much as I knew about IT and finance and HR, and I worked in, concert with them as a comms lead, now I own all of these functions for this business. And so that's a different take on things. And, you got to have the right talent to your point you made earlier, to come in and own all those disparate functions and do all that stuff. So phenomenal experience. During my tenure, we won a huge contract called the Infantry Squad Vehicle, which is essentially we took our Chevy Colorado midsize pickup truck. We had a particular architecture for that they used in off-road racing. So they had about 10,000 hours of time racing this truck with much success in racing in the desert. And we transformed that vehicle into an Army version of it and won the contract. And so GM is currently producing thousands of this for the this platform for the U.S. Army. So huge win for us. And then, a couple other, little smaller things, but, great experience. Loved it. And it was, a great learning environment for me. So I held that job for 2 years and ended up leaving, just because, one of the things that I guess had always fascinated me was technology. I'd worked some time, I left Sears to go to Compaq, which became Hewlett Packard. So the technology of computers has always been something I enjoyed. Well, we'd had a number of GM executives go to Amazon, and we had a good number of it. And so just friends who had left to go to Amazon, hey, send me your resume. Okay, no intention of leaving what I'm doing. But, I had an opportunity to go be a VP of communications at Amazon Web Services. And you're talking about being at the pointy end of the spear on technology. AWS is it. Yeah. Holy moly. And wow. So, I made the tough call to leave GM Defense to go to AWS. And I'm telling you, and this is all during COVID. So, all of this, I never met a single Amazonian in person. I did this all from the basement of my house.
Yeah.
Right. Getting that job, going through the interview process and everything else, and took the job. And so, about 3.5 months into it, I'm just getting my feet wet and enjoying the experience. And it was, you talk about fire hose, it was probably 10 fire hoses in terms of learning the speed, the cadence, the technology globally, what cloud technology is really all about and what you can enable for your customers who use it. It's just really fascinating. Then I had a huge left hook thrown at me, which just knocked me beyond on my butt. Which was my oldest daughter got diagnosed with leukemia, right? So thankfully, she's in remission now. But at the time, that was probably the biggest gut punch that I'd ever had in my life. I don't care about anything else that ever happened to me. When your child, gets diagnosed with that, everything stopped. Exactly. I took a leave of absence. I said, okay, I got to focus and everything else. And as I got like 3.5, 4 months into that, I just decided, life is, one of my favorite movies is The Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, man.
And Morgan Freeman in that movie says, hey, get busy living or get busy dying. Yeah. Once I kind of put that quote into context, it was like, well, my whole goal was to be a CCO. That happened some years ago. I've now been a president. What are you doing in corporate right now, right? If you go back to AWS, it's not going to give you the freedom, flexibility to be up and down this road because my daughter lives in Philly. I'm in the DC area. If I need to be on Tuesday at 3:00 in an appointment, but I'm in the throes of all the meetings and everything else, I can't do that for her. Yeah. So I said, I'm not going back. So I resigned. Yeah. Thankfully, as hard as it was, Andy Jassy was the CEO of AWS. And then my boss, Drew Herdner, who was the chief comms guy at AWS, and all the leadership, they were so gracious and understand,
Yeah. How could you not be?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always thankful for just how they treated me during that tough process for me. And as tough as it was since I had just gotten there to leave, they'll always be friends of mine and I'll always be fans of theirs just because how they treated me when I made my decision. And
by the way, if you don't mind me saying, I'm so glad to hear that your daughter's in remission.
Thank you.
And I know that we'd spoken about this before, but look, man, this is a perfect example of understanding your why and your purpose and your passion. And I know I kind of know what comes next, but I who could be in your shoes and make a different call? I don't know. I don't know if that's, I'm sure there are people who might, but those are not people that I would necessarily want to know. So Anyway, I'm just glad to hear that your daughter's
No,
doing
thank you, sir. Appreciate that. So, I decided to start this business that I'd been thinking about for years, and I was probably going to do whenever I hung up my cleats and got off the field, right? Okay, you're going to do a business, be a consultant. You've been in PR enough. You got enough contacts in PR. Okay, you'll just do some stuff, and that'll be it. Well, so that was the initial concept for what my business is now, 1988 Strategies. 1988 being the year I graduated from the Naval Academy. And so it started that way. But then as I started reaching into my network group and just kind of formulating ideas on what this business was going to become, I reached into a couple of executive coaches that I'd known. And I'd been fascinated with that because I'd been such a career-long mentor and I've loved giving back, just to people. How I was thankful, but how ironic that in 2021, the Planck Center for Leadership and Public Relations gave me the Jack Coaten, Corporate Mentor of the Year award, right? That was probably, I've won awards, I've won silver anvils and, other kind of company awards for team work that we've done. And I've loved although, it's great for the team, et cetera, et cetera. But to be awarded for something that you do to give back to something, that really meant a lot, right? And so, of course, I joined the Planck board the next year, right? I was thankful, right? But so that was great, and I love my colleagues there and the organization. But so here I am, like, okay, because at the time I knew coaching, but I was still equating it in my head to mentoring. It's kind of one and the same, and I can give this back and everything else. And so my brain, I was like, well, if I can become a coach and get paid to be a coach, I never have to retire. Okay, I can be on the RV, I can be anywhere and be coaching, and that'd be great. And so I took a couple of coaching training courses. I have some, really good friends who have one in particular who runs a coach training institute. Mm-hmm. So I went to her school. And then just as I expanded my coaching network, the word Georgetown's Institute of Transformational Learning kept coming up. And Georgetown's kind of known as one of the top coaching training programs. Since I'm here in DC, why not? So I applied and I got picked up. So I went through Georgetown's coaching program, finished that last year, March, April, something like that. And so here we are. And so I got my certificate, ended up being accredited by the International Coaching Federation as a coach. And I'm telling you, man, as much as I enjoyed public relations, and I still do consulting in PR. I still do projects with some folks, agencies in-house, et cetera, workshops. There's a lot I still do in PR just because in this big noggin of mine, I still got some ideas rolling around and some experience. But what I really enjoy is the discovery of working with somebody as a coach, which is much different than being a mentor. And here's how, right? When I mentored people, right, I had a particular career trajectory and it worked for me and it was my path and it was all great. And so now that I recall of, my conversations with people I'm mentoring, it was pretty much 100% on transmit. Here's what I did, so you should do this too, right? Here's what you need to do. I'm being very directive. What I didn't realize then, right? So if you show up as a mentor to somebody and you got a title of president of General Motors Defense and you're talking to somebody that's 2 years out of college, I forget that I used to be that person. And if I'm talking to somebody who's a director, my eyes are wide open like, oh my God, that's the director, right? There's that title shock, right? Same thing happened when I was in the military. I'm a lieutenant. I'm talking to this admiral in the Pentagon. I forgot about that experience. And so here I am being very directive. And most likely every third word is being absorbed while they're getting over the title shock. And so not as effective as a mentor. And, as a mentor, if you're assigned a mentor or something, your willingness to kind of be open, transparent, to really talk about some of your misgivings, some of the challenges you're having. You want to show strength. You want to show that, hey, I'm capable. You've chosen the right person. And so you're not going to get into all of that necessarily with your mentor. But as a coach, I'm disassociated. I don't have any skin in the game, right? We've got an established time frame that we're going to work together and co-create your future and identify those issues that you might need to work on, whether it's a skill base, your business acumen, leadership presence, your communication skills, how to network, how to overcome, so many different things that perhaps you didn't necessarily, think about on a daily basis, right? So, if you think about it, we all deal with change differently. I talked about a whole lot of change from my military days, et cetera, et cetera. But every aspect of our professional life is change.
Yeah.
We change from this job to the next job. We get promoted or we go to a new company. That's change, right? But the internal workings of our psyche and how we show up, it's not something that we expose to everybody on a daily basis, right? So if you're a certain person, you might say, I freeze when I speak to senior people. I don't have enough confidence. I want to find my leadership voice, right? I shy away from difficult conversations. These are all inside conversations that we have that I'm never going to show to anybody else. Yet I'm sitting there in that meeting and I'm smiling and I'm trying to put my best face forward and I'm trying to perform at my highest level. Yet internally, I've got all this stuff going on. Okay. That's what a coach can address with you, right? Because you're in this safe, confidential environment that allows you to go deeper, you to have an agreement that says over the course of this time period, we're really going to dive into things. And what you learn when you go through your coaching training is you hear you learn how to listen in a different way. Mm-hmm. But you're also, in terms of what they're saying to you, you're also becoming an adept at learning what they're not saying to you. And what their body language is when they're saying it to you. So I can kind of maybe dive into that. And while we may have, when I ask you at the beginning of a coaching session, what would you like to focus on today? And they have an idea and, okay, we start going down that road. But then I identify something that perhaps, your body language showed me, or the way you answered that question showed me there's something there. And we dive into it. Mm-hmm. It may change the trajectory of the conversation with the idea that we're trying to address something that's holding you back. And the thing I've loved out of this is kind of the discovery that happens with that individual. And then to hear at the end of the coaching engagement, like, Dave, I would have never gotten to this place if I wasn't working with you. I had one guy, first time this happened to me, he'd been trying to get a promotion for a couple of years. He finally gets the promotion to director. And he said, Dave, this never would have happened if I wasn't working with you. That I'm telling you, that was probably the high of one of the high points of my career. I helped that person directly feel like he was capable of, moving on in his career. So that's what gets me up these days. I love being able to coach folks in that way. And what I also really enjoy is kind of juxtapose that experience of being a PR communications professional that help to train and coach people how to position and message and everything else. And then being able to juxtapose that with communications piece so that I can think about things holistically and how a person is engaging with teams, with the seniors, with subordinates, with external stakeholders, with everybody. And so I think it's kind of a unique mixture of skills and background and experience that I bring to my coaching profession. Profession now, and I enjoy it. I am really enjoying what I do every day.
I can tell, that you certainly have a passion for it, and it just, even from talking to you back in October and recently, you said it even earlier, like you're here to help people, right? If you have to go through life, you're helping people to accomplish something, or else what's the point of it all? Everybody has their own purpose and their own mission. I get that. But when you're a coach, you're sort of more directly engaged, I think, in that one-to-one, making a difference for one person and helping them through their shit, basically. And not in the same way that a psychologist does or a consultant does, right? No. It's because you're dissociative is what that was like.
Well, the difference is this, right? A psychologist is working on something that happened in the past, right? Something traumatic happened and it's still affecting you. And all right, let's deal with coping mechanisms so you can get past that moment. A coach may look back a little bit, but really our job is to look to the future. What's your plan for success in the future? And how are we going to let this thing that happened not be a barrier to you? So let's put together coping strategies on how you're either going to remove the wall, go over the wall, knock the wall down, go around it, do something, but not let it be the barrier that it is today. And so I'm focused 100% on the future and hopefully co-creating, with the client doing pretty much all the work. An individual development plan, it allows them to hold themselves accountable for doing the work and putting together smart goals against it that they can look at and continue to use to grow over time, because it'll morph. It's not just, something you put down on paper today. I've checked off every box, so therefore I'm done with continuing to improve myself. I can look at this and adapt it as I continue to grow and go and get higher level positions and, go after my aspirations and all that. So it's a great tool, using what we've learned during our coaching engagement to continue to help people to grow for the rest of their career.
I've loved working with coaches, and I even toyed with the idea of becoming a coach myself when I was between things and just trying to figure out where my strengths are. I took a lot of assessments, and all the assessments basically saying, you should be a coach, or you should be a, something related to learning and coaching, and that area, like experimentation is sort of where I like to be. So I put that aside. I mean, something there for the future for me. And I'm always interested in hearing more about how people are getting on with their coaching practice and learning about it more. And, every time I speak to a coach, whether it's for me personally, or just a friend or somebody I meet or somebody on my podcast, I always learn something new. Today, one thing you said kind of also is sticking out at me, like you're coaching, so you're following not only the techniques and the methodology and the kind of standards of practice that you've learned, that you've formally learned and also informally learned. Your ICF certification and all of that. But it seems to me that you're very effective also because of your comms experience. So the communications and coaching is sort of a unique Venn right there, right? Communicator, coach. I mean, I guess there's a lot of coaches who may have been in sales or were sort of,
from all backgrounds.
From all backgrounds, yeah.
From all backgrounds.
A lot of academics going to but then, you have that other side of it as well, coming from military, and then, then having been a true leader of big organizations and small teams to large teams, like having been in the thick of it. So that combination there is very I think that's a special one. So, I meet communicators all the time who have been CCOs maybe, and it's interesting how you weren't looking to be, like, you wanted to be a CCO, but you hadn't had experience as a CCO, and yet you were asked to become you were promoted to CCO at Exelis. Then later when you became the president of GM Defense, you hadn't had experience as a president. You weren't looking for that role, but yet something around you or about you, convinced someone important to say, we need David for this role, right? And I think whatever that is, that thing is, that is that quality that Seinfeld might call a hue. You have a hue about you. I don't know. Is that, like, I think that is one of the things that probably makes you an incredible coach, like being sort of receptive to those ideas and having gone through all that yourself. And it's just it's a working theory. I'm working on it as we speak.
Oh no! Keep going. You're doing a lot of great coaching right now.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. It's really interesting to me because, okay, well, like I even that the idea that you had said you were asked to be a CCO, but yet you'd never been a CCO before. Everybody has to have a first time to be a particular role, right? I mean, I understand, like, you're talking about a major listed company that has, billions, like a multi-billion-dollar company. So you would think, well, maybe they would want to grab a CCO who has, FinCom's experience and so on, and all that kind of good stuff. But, you clearly had this, knowledge of the business, relationships with the people around you. Maybe
Correct.
That's the key.
It is relationships. I was going to dive in there. It is all about relationships. And it's not so much who you know, but who knows you, and what do they know about you? What do they believe about you? And what do they trust about you? Right? Showing up in a way where I'm not just a comms guy, right? I'm a business, partner. I can talk about things in their language. I can think about things through the lens that they think about things, connect dots in a way, and not be afraid to speak up on topics that have nothing to do with communications. Okay. When you're in that situation, it's kind of a fearlessness, and I think I developed that years ago, get back at the Naval Academy. And I think I've used that well, in being in every situation where I don't feel like I have to be the shrinking violet, even if I'm in the cheap seats in the room. I can have a smart question. I can make a comment, even if it's going to be unpopular, right? Oh, yeah. Albritton, shut up. What are you talking about there, Albritton? That kind of thing. Well, if it's smart and if it's, you're paying attention and if you've done the work prior to, then it's not so much of a dumb question. One of the things I counsel people as a mentor, as you think about, becoming a more senior practitioner, being accepted and those types of things, is going into every situation as prepared as you can be. If you're going into a meeting that you normally have not gone to or something like that, trying to get a copy of the presentation or trying to have a conversation with the presenters to understand the context for which they're going to be presenting something. So there you go in with some knowledge that you can then apply your functional expertise, knowledge, skills, abilities that smartly contributes to the conversation. If you're going flat-footed because you just by happenstance got into the meeting, okay, you're taking copious notes, but you're paying close attention to where the puck is being hit towards the goal or whatever. And you're going to skate there and then hopefully, be a contributor to the success of whatever the idea is, the investment, whatever it is. And then if you are if there's a huge knowledge gap, following up with the people who put the presentation together or the speaker or whomever it is to learn as much as you can about that so you're carrying it forward. So the next time you go into the meeting, you are more than prepared and you're talking about it from not just hey, well, let's just write a press release about that, right? Right? Because if you go in with that mindset, you will never move forward. They will still continue to look at you as just the comms guy writing the press release, writing the story, posting on Twitter and all those things, and not a strategic business partner. I'll plug it just because I've given this book away, but the book that the first book that Ron Culp and Matt Ragus wrote, Finance. What was it? Oh shucks, I should know this. I've given it away so many times. But they've written 3 books, and it's basically a Business Acumen 101 series, right?
Ron
for communicators. Ron Culp. Yeah, Ron Culp and Matt Ragus, both professors at DePaul University. And forgive me for having a brain fart here.
I'll find out what they are, and I'll put them in the show notes. It's all good.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a great read. They're not thick books. They're an easy read, but they're a glossary of terms that give you the basics about business. And I've given away that book to people who don't work in communications so that they think about how to, increase their skill and their acumen about how business operates.
Is this is this Business Acumen for Strategic Communications?
Yeah, that's it.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's Matthew Regis
and Ron Culp. Yeah, so I think that's the second book or third book. I'm quoted in the second book.
Yeah, Mastering Business for Strategic Communications.
That's the third one.
And Business Essentials for Strategic Communicators.
Business Essentials for Strategic Communicators. That's the first one.
Yeah.
And so, that series is a great set of tools for communicators at every level to begin your mastery of the business. Okay. If you have aspirations to ultimately be a CCO or you want to be an SVP or a VP or something like that, it starts with your understanding how this organization makes money and how you contribute to it. And I don't care if that's a corporate entity, a nonprofit entity, small business, it doesn't matter. To be able to position communications in a strategic manner is the formula for success for any communications person who aspires for greatness. You got to start that at some point. And so, one of the reasons I love guest lecturing is because I hit the undergrads and the grads at that level say, hey, now is the time to start. I didn't have that advantage when I started coming out of the Navy. I knew nothing about corporations. I made some stupid decisions and mistakes because I had no idea how business operated or how to operate, or how to handle a brand. I mean, my first job, I owned PR for the Die Hard brand, batteries, Craftsman tools, Weather Beater paint, Kenmore appliances. And I guarantee you some of the early decisions I was making had no idea what the Kenmore brand really meant in the marketplace, right? Had to learn it. But as much as, people are able to learn the business and then apply, just reasoning and, ask smart questions of people when you don't know things. Yeah. Over time, you'll start learning things that allows you to show up differently in the eyes of those people who, again, need to see you show up differently for them to make a decision about where you grow and go in your career.
That's the crux of it, isn't it? Like you said, just as you said earlier, it's not so much who you know, but who knows you. I've been hearing a lot lately, and it's probably just because we talked about the universe earlier, and sometimes when you open your eyes to something, you're tuned to something, you see a lot more of it. Was it the law of attraction, some people call it, or whatever? There's different iterations of that, but you start to pay attention to something, you see it more often, and I've been into my own self-learning. My podcast is basically my own curriculum. Like I just learn all the time, but I also, kind of involved in some communities just to keep my skills up, hey man, not getting any younger, but I'm telling you, I better know more about AI. I better know more about Web3. I better know more about, Comtech, all these great things that 20-year-olds do, right? Because I don't necessarily know how to code, but I definitely need to know what it means to a business.
Absolutely.
And I spend a lot of time doing that kind of stuff. And people are like, why are you spending time doing that? I'm like, okay, well, you're going to find out. 5 years, you're gone. I'm not, right?
There you go.
Yeah. So, but the whole point is that in the process of all this, probably understanding those things is one thing, but being known is another, right? And being known, there was a time where you could just say, I'm going to buy ads. I'm going to just be loud. I'm going to get out there and I'm going to be known. But that is no longer a valid assumption. You have to be known because you are contributing, because you are effective, because you are you mean something to people, because you are meaningful, you are delivering meaning, you're delivering purpose, and you have a purpose. You can't just be like some guy who's out there. I mean, that's not going to last. So,
the same is true for individuals, but it's also true for organizations now.
100%.
So you think about the old premise that we had as communications pros back in the day. Our whole goal, the holy grail, was front page, top of the full Wall Street Journal, big headline. I won if I got that, right? I didn't care who actually read the article or whoever even saw it, but because I got Wall Street Journal, I was a hero, right? Now, right, if I think about this strategically, the journal may or may not be the holy grail that it used to be, because the key stakeholder group, after I've done my analysis, they're not even reading the journal. I don't need them to read the journal to understand my message, my position, and everything. So I've got to be very strategic about how, I'm going to engage with them. It might be the Dan Nessel show that says I need to really position myself in this way, because this audience is going to receive my message most effectively through this channel. Yeah. Yeah. That is the change that, it's going on in our profession. And the quicker that we as professionals pick that up and are able to do our stakeholder analysis so that we are using the right tools, right channels to reach those key stakeholders, so we can connect dots in new and unique ways and ultimately help the organization that we're in win. That's what it all comes down to. That's the main difference. And then when you tack on the additional responsibilities that we as communicators have, right? I don't care if we aren't the chief diversity officer. What we do around diversity, equity, and inclusion in a corporation is highly, attached to communications. What we do around ESG, right? And we think about this from a public company reporting perspective. DEI, ESG, all those things are core constructs of what companies have to report these days. they're all attached to communications as well, even though if we don't necessarily own it. And there's many of those types of things that are attached to things that we are responsible for, either directly or, indirectly, that we have to know about and how to, actually support on top of all the traditional things that we were always responsible for as well. So as much as, when I'm guest lecturing at universities, and I'm talking to younger students, it's like, start learning this now as fast as you can, because when you get out here, you're going to have to apply a lot of book knowledge and smarts and everything you've come across in new and unique ways. And you're going to have to know a whole lot more than you probably knew 2 years ago when you were a junior in college.
Yeah.
The more you can recognize and dive into this profession as it's changing and morphing, to your point, with a chat GPT and, Web3 and all these other things that are coming up very quickly, dinosaurs like me aren't going to necessarily be as successful in these areas as you are, because you're living this, in the way that I'm not.
Well,
use that for your advantage.
You always got to, it's like, change is life, right? Changes your lifeblood, I think, in communications and people. I think what you just said about all the different areas that we are in, like DEI, ESG, anything the company reports on, we're part of, but we're also part of anything that goes from executives out to the public, anything that goes into our employees' inbox internally, anything that is about the reputation or about the brand that is not related to particularly a specific product benefit or anything like that. Generally speaking, we've got our hands on that. That's a big universe of stuff, a lot of opportunities to influence, a lot of opportunities to fail.
Absolutely.
And it's a lot of pressure. Add to that, right, the idea that you've got holes to fill in your business acumen, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's no, you have to choose your battles. You have to choose the timing of all these things. But to me, all this sounds like is learn or die, keep learning. And that is going to be the force that drives your career to wherever it goes. And maybe one day you can be David Albritton and, be a CCO and a president and a board member and just a killer coach, the whole nine.
Yeah.
That's my whole takeaway here.
Amen.
Yeah. So David, look, we got to wrap up. But before we go, any last words, anything you want to leave the folks with that they should be paying attention to?
No, well, thank you. First, Dan, thank you for the opportunity to come on the show. I was excited when you told me about it in October. Once I looked into your show and everything, it's like, wow, yeah, this would be really cool. I know you and I would have a really good dialogue. I think, as my get off the stage message to us in our profession is just because I have worked for a lot of companies. I've dealt with a lot of, agencies and in-house people. I currently and previously over the last year and a half or so, coached a number of folks in the PR community. We can do better at leadership, at guidance, at helping our people really take advantage of growth in their career. Many times we don't give direct feedback. You need more leadership presence, and that's what we leave our people with. And so we're leaving them scratching their head like, well, what's that mean? If you're not going to tell me exactly what leadership presence is, how am I going to get better? I can't tell you how many times have had that dialogue in a coaching session with someone who has a leader who didn't really explain exactly what they want. And then we're surprised when people vote with their feet and they leave our organization because we're not giving them direct feedback and we're not giving them crystal clear guidance on how they can grow within our organization. Ultimately, that's what people want. They want to see a vision. They want to see a North Star, and they will stay with you if they feel like they have the opportunity to continue to grow in your organization. As soon as they feel stifled and nobody is going to give them opportunities to continue to grow, that's when they start looking outside. I'm going to shamelessly plug coaching here.
Please.
Coaching can be a game changer when it comes to trying to help people invest in themselves, see themselves in a different light, and ultimately try to make the smartest strategic decisions for their career that can and should be, continue to be connected to your organization. The investment in coaching for that individual is cheaper than having to replace that person, because studies have shown it. And for whatever the total comp was for that person that left, about half of that it's going to cost me to recruit the person to replace them.
Yeah.
So an investment in coaching in the short term is a whole lot more effective than, what's going to cost me to replace that person. And when you've got a coach who's also been a PR exec, here I am.
That's great. A PR exec and a leader of a
board member.
Of a defense
I'm
business.
currently on a public company board. Embecta Corporation is a spinoff from Becton Dickinson. It's a $1.2 billion diabetes care business, largest pure play diabetes care business in the world. If you think about injection devices for insulin and pen needles and those types of things, about 30 million customers around the world with Embecta, and having people in my immediate sphere of influence who are living with diabetes. It's an honor to be at a company who's investing, in R&D to help the lives of people with diabetes. So that's a blessing of mission and purpose for me, and so I'm really thoroughly enjoying this assignment as a board member as well.
You have so much like that whole. I was going to say you have it all, man, but you certainly have a lot, and you've built a hell of a career, hell of a life. And hey, I'm so happy to know you and learn from you, and I'm glad now I'm counting you as one of my small M mentors, by the way.
Yeah, love it.
If that's cool with you.
Absolutely.
Look, everybody out there, you've heard. It's funny when we started this, just before we got on. Before I hit the on button, the record button tonight, I said, no, we're not going to go 90 minutes. It's usually about an hour. So we're here at 90, and I can't believe we're only at 90. It's been such a ride and a joyful ride to hear what David has to say and to have this conversation. If you want to know more about David, you can find him on LinkedIn, David Albritton, and his name will be spelled properly in the episode title. 1988strategies.com. That's 1988strategies.com. Check him out there. Twitter at David Albritton, and again, just his name. And anything else, David? Is there any place I've heard? 4forces.eg.com? Is that another one?
So that's another coaching company that I formed last year with 3 other coaches. Yeah. We all have our disparate coaching businesses that we brought together for that company to try to build scale for certain types of audiences. We're all veterans. One of the concepts that we would love to get behind is to provide executive coaching services to transitioning veterans. That is one of the populations in our country that go underserved. And you think about it, if you're a tank driver for 20 years or a pilot or, whatever you did in the military, and trying to then transition that to a corporate context, a nonprofit context, and trying to create a value proposition that allows civilians who've never lived your experience, it's a hard thing. And more than 75% of people who transition from military report that they have a hell of a time transitioning. Yeah. Coaching can help those people. And so we want to build scale around that. That's one of the missions that we have with that business. And there are other things, obviously, that we're doing, at scale. But, that would be nirvana if we could work up every day and really dive into helping veterans transition effectively. That's a calling that we all believe in.
That sounds like a wonderful purpose, a great mission. And again, that's 4 Forces EG, and it's spelled out FOUR, Forces EG, executivegroup.com. David, I've really enjoyed this. Thanks so much for coming. And I'll see you again.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks for listening to the Dan Nessel Show. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. People always ask me, why do I do the show? I do it for the ratings. I do it for your validation. So do me a favor. Go over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or someplace else, wherever you're listening to podcasts, and subscribe, leave a review, rate me, and share with your friends. Anything you can do to spread the word, I deeply appreciate it. Thanks again for listening to The Dan Nessel Show.